Hi. So I'm Lisa Schlossberg. I'm here to kind of bring it home and talk about how this whole mind-body connection thing relates to weight loss, obesity, etc. Obesity currently affects more than a third of the entire world's population. It's an upward trend that continues to rise. In 2016, more than 1.9 billion adults were overweight, and of this, 650 million are obese. 1 in 5 school-age children is also obese. At least 30 million people of all ages and genders will suffer from an eating disorder in the United States, and every 62 minutes, someone dies as a direct result from an eating disorder. Our collective relationship to food, mentally and physically, is clearly not working out well. Part of the problem is that even though human beings are mind-body connections, thank you, the issue of weight loss, weight maintenance, weight management in general is usually only a physical approach. So what we normally do is turn to doctors, pills, surgery, diet, exercise, eat less, exercise more, calories in, calories out, no pain, no gain. But for every action, there is a reaction. And the consequence of going about it this way is that 95 to 98% of the time it doesn't work. So I write protective response mechanism because that's exactly what it is. Every time you go on a diet, your brain thinks you're in a famine. And so the reason when the diet ends and we gain all the weight back plus some, the plus some is important because your brain says, I'm not only going to restore your body from the last famine you were in, but I'm also going to protect your body from the next famine you have to go through. So if you ever wonder why 98% of dieters wake up one day and lose all their willpower, it's because we're biologically designed to end up heavier than when we started. But within the context of consumerism and capitalism, we have a $70 billion diet industry that not only has a 2 to 5% success rate, but gets repeat customers by convincing them they're failures. So, to be completely honest, it's not as simple as saying diets don't work, because I wanted to know what happens to that 2 to 5%. How do they keep their weight off? What are they doing? And so I found the National Weight Control Registry, which is the largest survey of people who have lost and maintained over 60 pounds. And what they have in common, you can find this on their website, is a low-calorie, low-fat diet, daily exercise, and they weigh themselves often. So it's really not that diets don't work. They do. It's just that diets can't end. If you want to commit the rest of your life to being on a diet, you can probably maintain what you lose, but most of us can't do or don't want that. I certainly didn't. Most of the people I work with certainly don't. So every time we are encouraged to go on a diet, we're set up for a future of 3 things. 1, obesity, because they result in weight gain. 2, yo-yo dieting, if we try to lose it again. And 3, disordered eating, if not eating disorders, when we try to control it. So I have a client, adolescent females who explore dieting are 18 times more likely to develop an eating disorder than those who don't. I have a client who remembers puking outside her pediatrician's office when she was 10 years old because she knew she would have to get weighed inside. This is how it starts. So every time a doctor fat shames their patient into dieting, they fail to uphold the fundamental medical principle of first do no harm. 7% of registered physicians are trained in nutrition, and by trained in nutrition, I mean they take 1 nutrition course in medical school. They're trained in medicine, and even the best doctors in the world are now admitting they don't know how weight loss really works. I have the pediatrician in California, who's the specialist in childhood obesity, recently shared with me that at a conference at Harvard Med, they were talking about how over 40% of nutrition science is false. So that means almost half of this very young, new science compared to chemistry, biology, is wrong. We're still figuring it out. And so I say all of this because the people in white coats don't have our answers to this physical problem. So as a hybrid personal trainer, health coach, and social worker, I see my role as helping people integrate body, mind, and soul. And through the work with my clients, I realized at some point that many of us who have attempted weight loss in the past have become completely disconnected from ourselves in the process. To lose weight, We turn food and eating into a numbers game. We use math, algorithms, calculations, formulas. We turn food into calories, macros, points, and we're calculating. With our absolute best intention, we use our left brain, in charge of data and analytics, to drive this process. And we turn off the feelings in our right brain because they're inconvenient. We go to the gym when we feel tired, and we call it willpower. We don't eat when we feel hungry, and we call it discipline. So when the diet ends without the formula, we don't know what to do around food. That's something I hear a lot. I don't know how to eat. Well, it's kind of ironic if you think about it, because how did you eat when you were 5, 6, 7, 8 years old? You ate when you were hungry and stopped when you were full. The thing is, those cues still live in our bodies, but we've migrated up into the knowledge of our heads. But if we want to build a healthy relationship with food and eating and our bodies, we don't have to learn anything. We have to unlearn a lot. We have to forget the rules that we've been taught to follow, the should and shouldn't paradigm, the good, bad, right, wrong. Because what if food was just food again? What if it was fuel, nourishment, energy? That's what calories are, by the way. They're a measurement of energy. So if we want to lose weight and keep it off long term, we have to lose weight as messy, complicated, multi-dimensional, emotional human beings, not bodies. So through my work, my personal experience, my independent study this semester, I'm here to tell you what I know. I think of it like a spectrum. On one side, we have the eat to live people. On the other side, those who have an eating disorder have a highly, intensely, and dangerously emotional relationship to food. But you don't have to have an eating disorder to have a really frustrating, confusing, emotionally draining relationship to food, just like you don't need to be diagnosed with clinical depression in order to feel sadness. So research actually shows that more people suffer from disordered eating than eating disorders, which means more people suffer from less frequent and less intense symptoms of anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating than those who actually have those disorders, which means more than 30 million people in the United States alone are falling through the cracks of clinical diagnoses and are struggling without any treatment plan. My point is that this is not an us versus them issue. We're all living in bodies, we all have to eat food, and we all have thoughts, beliefs, and emotions. So we're all on this spectrum somewhere. Because every time we eat food, our brain releases dopamine and serotonin. So these two chemicals combined with oxytocin and endorphins are what chemists refer to as our happiness cocktail, because they activate what's called the mesolimbic or reward pathway in our brain. So because humans survive on food, we are biologically designed to not only feel happy and rewarded when we eat it, but also to seek out a source of serotonin when our cortisol or stress is too high. So if you identify as an emotional eater or a stress eater, you are officially a human being. There is nothing wrong with you. This is how the mind-body connection works. The same reason that sex feels so good, it's our motivation to reproduce, is the reason food feels so good. We need it to survive. When dopamine receptors are removed from the brains of mice, they die next to food without the motivation to eat it. So because food influences our brain just like every other addictive substance or pleasurable activity, and our brain is always striving to meet an equilibrium of stress and stress relief. The real question is not, how do I stop eating? The real question is, why am I eating in the first place? Why is my cortisol so high that I need food to bring it back down? What is the source of the pain? What's the stress? What's the emotional issue that's going on that I'm using something on the physical surface to take care of? Before we can fully understand, though, our reaction to stress, we have to understand stress. So, because our brain doesn't know the difference between the stress of a lion chasing after us and the stress of traffic, Instagram, mortgage payments, social isolation, and trauma, the amygdala is activated even when we're not in actual life or death danger, and as a result, we're living with chronic, not acute, fight or flight symptoms. So just like stress by itself is not a problem, but a survival mechanism, using food to improve mood or decrease stress is by itself not a problem. It only becomes a problem when, one, we are stressed all the time as far as our brain is concerned, and two, food becomes the primary or the only mechanism that can improve your mood or decrease your stress. So not only do we have the amygdala, but we also have the hippocampus, which basically says it works, do it again, because it's in charge of storing memories. So if eating food has ever worked to uplift your mood or decrease your stress, your brain has stored it as an effective mechanism the next time you experience stress. So this is why I don't believe in self-sabotage. In some cases, it can be if someone really doesn't feel deserving or worthy of health. But some people don't feel undeserving or unworthy. They just feel comforted by food. And I personally think if food is the only thing that's going to get your brain out of fight or flight mode, then eating food when you're experiencing stress it's not your fault. It's not the problem. And so I don't think it's helpful for people to walk around feeling like at any moment they could spontaneously explode into self-destructive behaviors. This stuff is not random, and we deserve to understand it. So I have one client from last year, from my first year internship, who was explaining to me that he lost 130 pounds and then gained it all back plus some. And so I said, how do you feel having this weight on your body? Tired, angry, lethargic? And so I said, are there any good things about having this weight on your body? And so, as most people are, he was surprised to hear the question, but he had an answer. He said, yeah, people really don't mess with you as much. I said, so safety, comfort, protection? He goes, I really have a lot of those issues too. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, with being adopted and everything. I have another client who was working with dietitians and nutritionists who were pretty much at this point just yelling at him for not sticking to the 1,200 calorie meal plan, which, by the way, is inhumane. And so when he came to me at the gym, I said, do you know when your weight gain began? He said, no one's ever asked me that. And I said, well, do you know? He said, yeah. This is a guy associated with the fire department. He said, right after 9/11, when 6 of his friends passed away. This is not eating in response to appetite. This is eating in response to loss, grief, and trauma. Like I always say, if you're eating when you're not hungry, you're not responding to physical hunger, it doesn't mean the hunger isn't real. It just means the hunger isn't physical, and it can't be satiated with food. And so the conversation on food addiction is highly polarized. A lot of people are arguing it either is or is not an addiction. And I personally think that debate is completely missing the point. In some ways it is, and in some ways it's not. My point is that we're talking about becoming addicted to the thing we need for survival. It's more complicated than that. And I think we are only making things more complicated by trying to take our relationship to food and putting it into pre-existing frameworks. It's not drugs, it's not alcohol, and we have to start with that reality. It's more complicated than that. And so, having said that, the food addiction model is useful for understanding our relationship to food in some ways. And so one of the useful things about it is that addictions are split into either substances or behaviors. So for example, drugs and alcohol are substances, sex and gambling are addictive behaviors. This is both, because food is a substance and eating is a behavior. It gets even more complicated though, because on the food side of things, some foods are more addictive than others. High-fat, high-sugar foods are better for our survival. They create a stronger reward reaction in the brain, and so it's more addictive to us. There's a reason we binge on cake and cookies, not vegetables, all the time. And so on the other side of, this gets even more complicated now by the fact that the food industry is manipulating our food very intentionally to make it as addictive as possible. So that's the substance side of things. On the eating behavior side of things, eating, overeating, binge eating, compulsive eating, so when people ask, how can you be addicted to something like binge eating? Isn't it uncomfortable? To me, that's really similar to asking, well, why do people cut with razor blades. Isn't that painful? And so to conceptualize this theory, I looked into non-suicidal self-injury, and SSI, because people who are cutting are not considered to have an addiction to cutting, but they keep doing something physically painful for emotional benefit. And so according to the research, there are two theories, two motivations to turning to something like self-injury. One is that the activity itself is pleasurable, and two, it can be used to improve mood. And so food and eating is a prime example of something that does both simultaneously. Eating a piece of cake can be pleasurable by itself. It can also uplift your mood. And so if you ever wonder, how do people do this to themselves? How do they eat so much it hurts? People who are cutting are not doing it for cuts and scars. They're doing it because it provides them with a feeling of relief, or numbing, or escape, or connection, or something. The same reason people do sometimes binge on vegetables. It's not always about the food. It is sometimes about the behavior. My point is that what's happening on the physical, visible surface is a response to the invisible psychological environment. And so there is no question why people do what they do physically if it's providing the desired response emotionally. And so one argument against food addiction, I think, really helps illuminate my point. They say that even though music helps to illuminate the same dopamine reward center in our brain, there is no such thing as music addiction. And again, I think this completely misses the point. So Dr. Gabor Mate, an addiction expert, describes his own addiction to music. One week, I spent $8,000 on classical compact discs, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't help going back to the store. As a medical doctor, I used to deliver a lot of babies, and one time I left a woman in labor in the hospital to get a classical piece of music. And I still could have made it back to the hospital in time, but once in the store, you can't leave, because there are these evil classical music dealers in the aisles. Hey buddy, have you listened to the latest Mozart symphony cycle? You haven't? No? And so I missed the delivery of that baby. And then I came home and I lied about it to my wife. Like any addict, I would lie about it. So even though the DSM does not consider music an addiction, telling Dr. Mate that he doesn't have an addiction to music because it's not real doesn't help him with his addictive relationship to music. Even though the DSM does not consider food and eating an addiction, telling people who find emotional stability in eating food that they're not addicted, even though they feel like they are, is not helping anyone. Furthermore, saying food can't be an addiction because then we'd all be addicted also completely misses the point. Asking why aren't we all addicted to food is the same as asking, well, why isn't everyone who drinks alcohol an alcoholic? And again, Dr. Mate explains, it's a myth that drugs are addictive. Drugs by themselves are not addictive because most people who try most drugs are not addicted to them. So the question is, why are some people vulnerable to be addicted? Just like food is not addictive, but to some people it is. Shopping is not addictive, but to some people it is. Television is not addictive, but to some people it is. So the question is, why the susceptibility? And the ACE study proved it's not about what's wrong with them. It's about what happened to them. It's not the individual, but their situation. What was happening in their immediate environment when their brain was neurobiologically developing to cope with stress? What was the source of happy chemicals that they were conditioned to seek out at 3, 5, 7, 10 years old? Because if they needed to find a source of emotional comfort and didn't have access to drugs, alcohol, gambling, and cigarettes, food and eating could get the job done. And Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, thank you for mentioning her, who runs an ACE-informed medical practice in California, says, if you are a doctor and you see 100 kids that all drink from the same well, and 98 of them develop diarrhea, you can go ahead and write the prescription for dose after dose after dose of antibiotics. Or you can walk over and say, what the hell is in this well? Addressing weight management from the outside, on the surface, in the physical dimension, through things like diet and exercise, is, in my opinion, equivalent to writing a prescription for antibiotics. It does not address the root cause. We have to ask what the hell is in the well. What happened that made food a survival skill? What emotional role does it play in their life? What psychological need is it meeting? How did they get here in a holistic sense? So the real question is not, how do I get the weight off my body? The real question is, how and why and when did food and eating become my coping mechanism? Because this is not about changing our bodies, it's about rewiring our minds. The addiction model also gives us the principle of addiction transfer, giving up one addiction for another. And so if you type this into Google, the first two things you see are after bariatric surgery and after gastric bypass surgery. This is not random, because like any diet, dealing with the physical manifestation of an addictive relationship to food or eating can get the weight off. But if you're not dealing with the psychological reason that behavior pattern exists in the first place, you're putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, because we cannot solve an emotional problem with a physical solution. But there's one more reason that the principle of addiction transfer matters so much. In order for anything to become addictive, it just has to make us feel good. If it makes us feel good and it's activating that reward center, it can very easily go from use to overuse, misuse, abuse. So when your goal is weight loss, what feels good? Getting on the scale and seeing the number go down, putting on pants and realizing they're a smaller size, getting compliments everywhere you go, reward, reward, reward. Just like your brain doesn't know the difference between stressors, it also doesn't know the difference between rewards. So every time we physically go on a diet, what we do psychologically is create a new reward system. Because every time you eat a salad with no dressing, or you skip dessert after dinner, and you feel like you're doing something good, and you deserve reward, you feel reward. And every time you have any indication of being smaller, it's an indication that you are also better, more lovable, more worthy in a society as fat-phobic as this one. And so the praise and joy associated with weight loss becomes the source of happy chemicals. And so dieting, not eating, becomes your source of stress relief. So on the surface, it might look like you're invested in your weight loss, but in reality, you have an addiction to it. And the reason I'm laughing right now is because this slide is always when people start pulling out their phones and taking pictures, because I know it. I know it's true. So by solving one weight problem, the weight problem, we only create another. Instead of using food and eating to feel good, we use starvation to feel good. But because the body tries to protect us, diets can only last for so long before we're back to a binge, which we then respond to with another diet, which then results in another binge. And this is why yo-yo dieting is a phenomenon. But we have to remember that binging, or falling off track, losing control, being bad, is the correct and the only physiological response to dietary restriction, or being on track, in control, and being good. The hard truth is that in order to remove ourselves from this cycle, we have to stop restricting. When it comes to the unintentional weight gain following the intentional weight loss, it's not up to us. It's not a conscious choice. We don't decide to lose control or be bad. And unfortunately, we cannot out-willpower this from happening. It's the body's protective response mechanism against starvation. However, we do decide to get back on a diet. We decide to restrict our food again. So between restricting and binging, we have no power. But between binging and restricting, we have all the power. And so the key is to stop the cycle where we can after weight gain, and accepting where we can't after weight loss. Because we get ourselves into a situation where we're swinging the pendulum back and forth between two options that really don't agree with us mentally or physically. And so when I did a workshop at my yoga studio recently, a man came up to me and he said, you know, it really makes a lot of sense when you compare this to addiction, because I've been through rehab, but now there's no abstinence. So what do we do? And I said, well, you're right. There is no abstinence from food and eating. But food and eating are not the addiction anymore. Dieting is. So we have to abstain from dieting. Stop counting, measuring, tracking, portioning. That's what you have to abstain from. And he said, well, when you tell me to stop dieting, I have a pit of anxiety in my stomach. I said, of course you do. That's withdrawal. And he said, well, what do I do? I said, what did you do last time? You suffered through physical withdrawal, and now you have to suffer through psychological withdrawal. There is nothing to do. It's a feeling. You feel it. It's fear, anxiety, stress. You feel it because you're not going for fearless. You're going for brave, which means you feel the fear and do it anyway because that's the only way out. So just like it's not about the food, but how the food makes us feel, it's not about restricting. It's about how restricting makes us feel. So when I asked my client, Corey, recently, how do you feel when you don't eat all day? Good, successful, accomplished, pleasantly surprised, willpower. I can do it, strong. Reward, reward, reward. How do you feel when you do eat? Gross, disgusted, regret, horrible, awful, guilt, and shame. Because as soon as weight loss becomes the goal, our brain equates eating with stress and starvation with stress relief. So you and your conscious brain might want to stop dieting all you want, but without the structure, safety, control, and comfort of going on a diet, your animal brain thinks you're going to die. So I believe the mourning process is really absolutely necessary if we want to get out of this cycle successfully. If giving up a diet means losing your sense of safety, it's important to know that for very good reason, it's going to be really difficult to stop dieting. I didn't know. I didn't know what I was giving up psychologically when I lost 150 pounds physically. I thought it was a physical process. Get the weight off my body ASAP and I'll be fixed. It was simple. So I followed the orders my doctors gave me for 18 years, eat less and exercise more. Only I ate too little and I exercised too much for too long. I didn't see it this way at the time, but what I did was transfer an addiction of overeating into one of undereating. Luckily, my extreme and rapid weight loss made me so severely malnourished that I hit starvation mode. When a nutritionist explained to me that I had lost my period and my hair, and I was dizzy and nauseous and freezing all the time because my body was now fighting me to keep the weight on. That's what it does to try and protect you from starvation. I say luckily because have I never been forced to eat more and exercise less, I would have never had to kick what was a lifelong addiction to eating and then not eating for dealing with my emotions. I would have never figured out this mind-body connection. Without eating to numb my pain and dieting to distract me from it, I had to actually face it. So just like any addict that stops using, my therapist likes to say the floodgates were opened. Because instead of saying, it is what it is and I'm fine and it's not a big deal, now I was uncontrollably emotional about absolutely everything all the time. And so despite everything I argued growing up, my therapist was right all along. Life was so much harder without a shield of protection. And I really missed being twice the size when I didn't have to feel pain and vulnerability. So emotionally, I was a disaster, and physically, I was stuck in a cycle of binging and restricting, losing 10 pounds, gaining 15, trying all different kinds of diets. And it became clear, with the help of therapy, that this was about a lot more than just my body. And what I had to do was start taking care of my holistic health, mental, emotional, psychological, spiritual, social, all of which had been foreign concepts to me at the time. I was terrified of shifting my focus off my body because I was certain that I would end up at over 300 pounds again, but I was desperate for a new approach. Every time I lost weight, I gained it. All I knew was what didn't work. So instead of putting all of my effort into controlling my body, I started forcing myself to prioritize my health, my mental health. I was really skeptical at the time, but I started to explore things like meditating, visualizing, breathing exercises, journaling, gratitude, yoga, all of these things for my holistic health that were gonna bring my mind and body back together in the same place. And the less I focused on my weight, the less I found myself in a binge, restrict cycle with food. Because instead of using eating and dieting as coping mechanisms to deal with stress and emotion, all of these mind-body techniques became my sources of happy chemicals. I was still getting the stress relief that I needed just from healthier sources. And now it had been proven to me by me that my body is the effect, not the cause of my mental and emotional health. And if I feel my feelings, I don't eat them. I realized that a healthy weight wasn't about playing the physical game of balancing calories and controlling my body for the rest of my life, but about playing the psychological game of observing, honoring, and appropriately responding to my feelings. And my weight stabilizing physically was just a visible reflection of my relationship to food stabilizing psychologically. Using other methods of emotional regulation for what was going on in my mind allowed me to hear what was going on in my body. I could now be intuitive around hunger and fullness because I had coping mechanisms other than eating and dieting. Today, 6 years later, I still maintain my weight by focusing on my holistic health. I haven't stepped on a scale in years because it's not this. It's not all of these things on the physical dimension of our life. It's not me and food in my body. In reality, it's this. It's all of these things on the personal level, the internal level, what's going on in my body, what's going on in my life, with my friends, with my family, with my culture, in the world that we live in, the society, the social media we're using every day. It's all of these things that are affecting our relationship to food and our bodies. So I'm trying to create a world where it becomes clear that if the biggest problem you have with food is that you're an emotional eater, it's not a problem that you have with food. It's a question about how you're coping with your emotions. And so this is where I begin with my clients, because this is how it really works. They don't have an eating disorder. They just really don't want to go back to Weight Watchers for the 7th time. They're sick of tracking points. They're tired of counting calories. Not only did it not work, and it totally sucked. So they want to eat like a normal person. That's what I hear a lot. I want to just eat like a normal person. I want to live without having to think about food all the time. And also, what the hell is wrong with me that I don't know how to just live around food? And so I think it's really important to begin by explaining that there is nothing wrong with you. There is nothing wrong with us. And so sometimes people say to me, well, how is it possible that it's not my fault? I'm the one eating. Yes, you are. You are the one eating. But it is not your fault that the only thing that calms the primitive stress response in your brain is food, or starving, or both. It's not your fault because you were doing the right thing. As far as your amygdala is concerned, you were saving your own life. It's not your fault that your doctors, parents, teachers, coaches, bullies, friends, and the media influenced you and messed you up around food, and now you're here. You didn't have a choice. You weren't allowed to say no to fat camp when you were 7. You weren't allowed to say no to your doctors, and you weren't allowed to say no to your mom, who, by the way, only did her best by putting you on a diet at 10 years old. She was only trying to help you too. So blame doesn't do anything for us. The point is that you're here now with whatever relationship to food you have. But if you want to live a life of freedom, it is your responsibility to create it. No one can do this for you. And so now you do have a choice. Now it is in your hands. And now you can stop focusing on your body and focus on your health. Mind, body, soul, inside and out. And so I help people make that transition. And so I could talk about this chart for an hour and a half, but I'm just gonna go through it quickly because the weight side of this is all the things you wanna abstain from if you're trying to kick an addiction to dieting. I also just uploaded this to my website, so if you want to, it's all up there and you can download it. This is the kind of structured theoretical model of the work that I do with my clients. So getting out of what you know in your mind and into how you feel in your body. No longer is it not time to eat. I'm not allowed to have that. That's too much. Those are all rules that live in your brain. What we want to do is, how hungry are you? How full do you feel? That's in your body. Stress reduction over size reduction. If sadness makes you turn to a bowl of ice cream, the bowl of ice cream is not the problem. The sadness is what you need to deal with. Long-term over short-term. Diets only stop working when you stop using them. We live in bodies till the day we die, and we have to eat food every day. So anything that has an end date on it, you know that's when the weight comes back. There is no longer time for short-term solutions to anything. Balance over restriction. Are you allowing yourself to eat what you want? Are you eating what your soul wants in addition to what your body wants? Presence over planning. This is not about portioning your meals. This is about turning off the TV when you eat them. Observing over controlling. I had a client who realized she was stress eating 3 pieces of pizza. And that is not failure. There is no such thing as failure. It's all information. So the next time she gets really stressed out and there's 3 pieces of pizza in front of her, she can say, this might be stress. That's how this works. Intention over the result. Did you try? Did you try to pay attention to what you were feeling? Did you try to take care of yourself? Because defining success on just the result alone is pretty unrealistic and unfair for a human being where life happens and things come up. And questions over demands. This is about, do you want to go to the gym today versus you have to go to the gym today? And ultimately, self-love over self-hate. Take all the pictures you want. Because this is not about hating your body because it's trying to sabotage and ruin your life. It's not. It's about loving your body because it's the vehicle for you to experience life. This is about, how do I love and protect and cherish the thing that is taking me through the world? And so I think sometimes it can get really tricky, but it's a helpful tool because self-love is not just a helpful skill. It's the fundamental principle of this work. And so I include this Venn diagram because sometimes you can do things for your weight that are not necessarily healthy. Hydroxycut, appetite suppressants, and starvation. They might help you lose weight, but they're not healthy for you. There are also things you can do that are healthy. Snacks, alcohol, chocolate cake. Things that are healthy because we're human beings and what we want matters, but they won't necessarily help us lose weight. But the reason I bring self-love into the conversation is because it gets tricky with the things in the middle. Things like salad and cardio. We usually associate them with weight loss, but they're also just good for us. We should eat vegetables. We should get our heart rate up for our health, not our weight. And so when it comes to things in the middle, how do I know what is healthy? The intention is rooted in love, not fear. If you're eating a salad because your body is craving vegetables and it's going to make you feel good, that's love. If you're eating a salad because you're afraid not to, that's fear. If you're doing cardio because you have a lot of energy and you want to get it out and it's going to feel good, that's love. But if you're doing cardio because you're afraid of what will happen if you don't, that's fear. And just like it's not about the food or the restriction, but how they make us feel, it's not about what we're doing, it's about why we're doing it. And holistic health, mind and body, comes as a result of acting out of love. So we have to understand my approach is really boiled down into a 3-step process. 1, identify the stressors. It's different for everyone. 2, evaluate the stress relief. What are you doing to get happy chemicals back into your brain? And 3, explore alternatives. If that form of stress relief isn't working for you, what else can you do? And so I created this chart to very briefly explain what this actually looks like in reality. These are all real clients. I've gotten all their permission. And so this is where they are all over the world because technology is amazing and these sessions happen online. But this is what it looks like. There are stressors. Some work, some go to school, some are parents, one is a single mother. What is stress relief? It has become pretty much boiled down to eating and dieting. And ultimately, what are the alternatives? Meditating, breathing, journaling, painting, crying. And I put up Maggie here because Maggie to me is a prototype. Like many of us, she's been habituated into the helper role. She spends all her time helping, giving, extending herself, but not taking any time for herself. We realized through conversation one day, the reason that she loves showers so much is because it's her only alone time. So like many of us in the helper role, the rock, the fine one, the people pleaser, we learn early on not to express how we feel or what we need because we might feel like a burden to someone else. We might be perceived as whiny or complaining. So we power through and we deal with not getting our needs met. And because as adults, overworking and overproducing are so highly praised in this society, it's a really good way to lose yourself entirely. So the biggest challenge that I come up against with this work is guilt and shame. I feel bad for taking a day off of work. I feel bad for speaking up in my relationships. I feel bad for being selfish. The thing is, self-care is not selfish, it's necessary. But when you've spent your entire life taking no care of yourself, it feels that way. And so when I hear, but it's so hard, this is so hard, to that I say, yeah, it is. But what are your options? Living with the unexpressed emotion, the thoughts, the feelings, the beliefs, the desires, the needs, living with all of that unexpressed inside of you, or creating a life and disrupting the status quo that is really not working for you anyway. Neither of them feel good, so you might as well benefit from the healthy lifestyle meaning healthy relationships, healthy coping mechanisms, which then create a healthy body and weight. So when I first started working with Kate from Florida, she couldn't even get off the couch. She was feeling really, really depressed and couldn't get herself to do anything. Her therapist was suggesting that she get herself to the gym for 20 minutes of physical activity because it's proven to make you feel better. I said, Kate, I am not telling you to get to the gym. But we started creating her self-care checklist. And it's different for everyone, but this is how it goes. What did you enjoy doing when you were 5 years old? What did you enjoy doing when you were 10 years old? What are the things that you let go of because now, as an adult, you don't have time? They're silly, they're stupid, it's a waste of money. What are the things that fill you up that you have been neglecting? And so she easily came up with 15 items, all different things: bubble baths, walking the dog, going hiking. And so I said, I'm not asking you to go to the gym, but do you think you could get in a bubble bath? She was like, okay, that I can do. I said, I'm not going to tell you to work out. I'm not even going to ask you what you're eating. But do you think you could take the dog for a walk? She said, okay. So 2 weeks later, we meet up again. And I'm like, how are you feeling? She goes, Lisa, I have so much energy. I don't even know where it came from. Like, how did this happen? And I just started laughing because this is exactly how this works. Another week later, she texted me this. I don't encourage my clients to weigh themselves, but I also don't control their relationship to the scale. But so she texted me this, 199. She goes, I don't know the last time I was under 200 pounds. Now, 2 weeks ago, and by the way, I'm not even trying, not restricting, just listening to my body when I'm hungry, full, or want something. And just last week, she texted me, I've been on the treadmill for 2.5 miles before even realizing what I was doing. And then she got off and ate a salad because she felt like it. This is how this works. Oh no, I don't want to go there yet. So I think about Oprah, okay? I love Oprah. But last summer, she gave a speech talking about how she realized her relationship to food is emotional. And she hates confrontation. So what she does is bites her tongue and eats her words. And so this is about rewiring our brains and changing our lives. This is not about our bodies. And there is a fundamental shift that occurs when you realize that no matter how much you hated dieting, manipulating food was actually the easy way out. And I have a client, Kristen, who's exactly the same way. She's a manager at work, and she has one person she has to manage who's walking all over her and totally taking advantage of her. And so she was saying, I hate confrontation, I'm not doing anything about it, and then I eat about it. And so she texted me this. I disciplined that staff member on Wednesday, and I wrote in my journal, and I breathed like crazy. When I video chatted with her, she goes, I'm surprised they didn't hear me breathing in China. But I didn't eat. Hard but necessary, and I wouldn't have been as comfortable doing it if I hadn't been getting my head and emotions together. It's been needing to happen, and I've been sacrificing myself, but I am slowly finding my worth. So I had to include this because this is what it's about. When you have a sense of self-worth, you don't need your diet or your food intake to feel good. When you have a sense of self-love, you don't need food to be your companion. And when you can define yourself as a human being, not a body, when you know who you are outside of what you look like, the real transformation begins. So when we eat and move like we love ourselves and create a life and relationships like we love ourselves, on the physical dimension, as a direct and a natural consequence, everything sorts itself out for the healthiest. So there may not be a physical solution to an emotional problem, but there is an emotional solution to our physical problem. If I have learned nothing else in this process, it is that the healthiest thing you can do is fall in love with yourself. Thank you.